Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's dive into today's episode. Let's talk about the 3Ds to reaching your vision. This is a formula that helped me tremendously, and it's something that I came up with my dear friend, Jeannie Grabowski. First, I want to start with my dream, which is something that was planted in me from a very young age, that I've always wanted to speak on stadium stages. And when I went recently, just last week, I'm recording this on April 4th, but last week I went to the Journey concert at the new Chase Center in San Francisco. And it was my husband, Chris, that said, "That's going to be you on that stage one day." He had said that when the Chase Center was being built. And I thought, that's right, that is going to be me. So that was really fun and actually quite emotional to go to this weekend or last weekend, because I thought, wow, I want to be on the stage, and I am declaring that I am going to be on that stage as the featured speaker. But what is your dream? What do you want to make happen for your life? I want to support you in that 100%. And I want to share with you this formula that I use that helped me, called the 3Ds. Some of you have heard this before. I talk about it a lot. But the reason I talk about it is that, first of all, most of us like formulas. It's not going to be anything mind-blowing where you go, "Oh my gosh, I never thought of that before." But what's going to happen is you're going to start thinking about, what is it that I want to decide that I want to do, which is the first D. I'll go back and talk about what these all mean. And then the second one is to start declaring it. And then the third is to actually deliver on it. Or sometimes I will say, do it. And that actually brings to mind a funny story that reminds me when I was first in really diving into the personal growth space. I mean, I've always been into it ever since I was a kid, but in my 20s is when I wanted to be the Oprah of San Francisco. And I told everybody that, and that was a fun story. But and it's not just a story, it was something still that I dream of, although I want to be me. I don't need to be Oprah. And that wouldn't serve any of us if I couldn't even try to be Oprah. So let's just take that out of this whole conversation. But the thing that I did was on this call with a woman that I love, an author named Barbara Scher. She was a pioneer in the coaching industry, and she wrote a number of books. One of my favorites is called "I Could Do Anything If I Only Knew What It Was." And I'm telling you, as I'm telling you all of these things, I'm thinking about a million tangents that I could go on. So I'm doing my best to stay focused. So the first thing that I did was on a call with Barbara Scher. She offered this. At the time, there weren't really, nobody thought of what a webinar was, but basically I was on a conference call with her and a group of other people who had read her book, and she was doing some type of engagement, not just interview, but where you could engage and ask her questions. So when I told her my dream of being the Oprah of San Francisco, she said, "Well, why don't you just start?" And I thought, what are you talking about? How, I was dumbfounded, kind of like, now I don't even know what to say. And that's when she said, "Well, what does Oprah do? She interviews people. Start getting a group of people together. Pick someone that you would interview. Start doing this in your living room." And I know now this is an age-old thing that people have done to start businesses. You start in your living room or in your garage or whatever you have. You start there. And that was a really mind-blowing concept for me. The idea of just starting, I felt like, well, I just felt like I didn't know how to start, which is so funny. Like, I still, even as I'm saying it back to you, I feel like I'm still stumbling with my words, because it was such an easy answer, and yet it felt so hard to do. But for example, start with a list of people that you know who could help you. So that is one example. I don't want to get too off track here with my 3Ds, but the first one, let's talk about the whole concept of deciding. The first one is to decide. Now, I knew at a young age that I wanted to be a speaker of some sort. I didn't know all of the details. I knew that I wanted to own my own business. That's always been a thing. I've always been very entrepreneurial minded, but it wasn't until later in life that I realized that's what I want to do. Well, I was fortunate to have been in positions starting in HR and then doing corporate training. And in my HR role, which I talk about in other podcasts and other conversations, I created my own job as the training and development person within a company that where we didn't have one. So I said, well, I want to start doing this, and here's how it could be helpful. So that job I ended up creating, and then I got to experiment with all of these programs that then I could end up bringing with me later and teaching. I worked for the Gap for a good number of years as a leadership consultant. And then I went on to be at Decker Communications for 14 years, where I specialized in helping people communicate to influence, primarily in the corporate space. So I was traveling all over the place. I was doing corporate training. I was speaking on big stages. And then I was on the leadership team the last few years. And I remember feeling pretty stuck because I realized initially that's what I thought I wanted. But then I realized, you know what? I actually really love the work directly with people instead of administratively making decisions as you need to in a company that whether it's big or small, you've got to make decisions. And sometimes we get away from being with the client. So I realized that something needs to change. And my boss was super supportive. And after, frankly, almost 2 years of feeling stuck like a racehorse behind the gates, that's exactly how I felt. I had all of this energy, but I felt like I just don't know what I actually want to do at this stage or how to do it, and waiting for the path to be right and all of this. And frankly, it was the right thing for me to hold off at the time. But this anxiety around, gosh, I want to be doing something with more purpose, but I can't figure out what that is right now in this season of life. And maybe you can relate to that. What do you want to do with your life? And maybe you've lived quite a few years already, but you say, I still want more. I want something different. So I want you to know that there is hope for that. There is hope for you to find the thing that you want to do. We've got to keep experimenting. Just like Barbara Sher said in her book, I could do anything if I only knew what it was. That was super helpful for me because it helped me to realize you can try on any of these professions for a week or two. And I don't mean literally most of the time, but her invitation was, you want to be a writer? Try it for a week. What would a writer have for breakfast? How would a writer organize her day? Anything like that. So start thinking like that, acting as if it's already happening. That can help you to start really getting focused on this. And when we start focusing on things, things start happening. It's just like that whole I know it's a whole thing and I can't think of what it's called now, but where you want to buy a new car and you decide on the car that you want to look at, and then suddenly you see those cars everywhere on the road, whereas you weren't looking for it before, so it wasn't in your line of sight or vision and such. So we've got to be thinking about what is it that we want, and the first step is to decide. Now, what happened for me, my story around really deciding as of late, the last couple of years, is, and I'm recording this on April 4th, 2022, by the way. In September of 2019, I decided, and that's how I'd made a decision to put my stake in the ground. That was when I say I decided, I put that stake in the ground and I invested in Mic Drop Workshop by Jess Ekstrom. And when I did that, that really shifted something for me. There was a mindset shift. There was a financial commitment. So it was almost $1,000 to invest in that. And while I was still at my corporate job, thinking, how am I going to have the time to do this? It was essentially, it's an online course plus a Facebook community. Now, that commitment helped me solidify that decision where I said, I'm going to be a professional speaker on my own. I was already a speaker with Decker, but I wanted to do it on my own, specifically empowering women to speak with confidence. I'm really passionate about helping women to stop holding back from sharing their ideas and speak up with confidence so that they can stand out. So decide is the first one. That really worked for me. And a lot of things shifted at that point. Sometimes it's just the act of deciding that makes all the difference. Number two is to declare it. Declare for me means tell everybody you know, this is what I'm doing now. When you start telling people, there's another energy shift that happens. First of all, they start seeing you in that role. And do your best to not let the naysayers get to you. If your family or your friends start saying, well, who are you to be doing that? Or, oh, I can't believe it. Usually people are just jealous, or they simply don't have the energy or the same passion as the rest of us. So don't let those people get you down. With that, number two, declare. Make sure that you declare and stay focused on what it is that you want. And here's a story, an example of that. So even though I had made this decision and I realized I declared it and then I started delivering it, what I started doing is getting things got a little muddled, because sometimes you can decide and declare something, but it doesn't mean that you're immediately going to get income from that or immediately going to reap the fruit of that. And so what I did when I realized, oh, wow, there's more than just, and I knew that there's more than just deciding and declaring, but what I needed to do, or what I ended up doing, is focusing more on where the money was coming from, which was more of my coaching. So I frankly, I don't want to say I got lazy, but I got a little unfocused. I got too focused on the coaching, and I started talking more about the coaching. And then I created group coaching, which I absolutely adore. And that was great. And I'm still doing that. But here's what happened. About a year in to leaving my corporate job, by the way, that was July of 2020. So if you're tracking with my timeline, the 3Ds, going back again, deciding was September 2019. And that putting that stake in the ground, investing in Mic Drop Workshop. And then I was planning to leave my corporate job at the end of 2020, but we all know that COVID happened. So that happened sooner than later. That happened in July of 2020. And then from there, when I started really focusing in on women, and I hosted a really successful summit called Ignite Your Confidence, but it was successful from a visibility perspective. But truth be told, it was not successful from a financial perspective right away. And I was faced with a decision of, oh my goodness, I need to figure out what I'm going to do here so that I can pay my bills. And I said, what do I know how to do? I know how to coach. And that's when I created this group coaching. And I am on my 9th cohort, by the way. That was an awesome experiment that turned into an amazing, amazing thing. But I say all of this to tell you that what happened in that, now you have to do what's necessary on one hand, but hold the vision on the other hand. So when I started this year, or really last fall of 2021, really saying, I am a speaker, and telling people that this is what I do. I didn't even talk about coaching anymore. That's when things started really picking up from a speaking perspective. So I want to remind you that declaring it, this second D, is all about letting everybody know what you do. And when it gets unfocused by saying, oh, I do group coaching, I do corporate training, I do one-on-one coaching, and I do some speaking. No, in that example, in my example, it's I am a professional speaker, and that is what I get paid to do. I focus on helping women, specifically supporting them with 3 C's to command any room with confidence. Now, in my case, I do have a signature talk, which is the one I just shared, and I will talk about other things, but I don't focus on that when I'm talking to people. I focus on I'm a speaker, here's my talk, and here's the audience that I serve. That in and of itself can make such a difference, because here's what happened. When I first started doing that, I noticed this with a woman who had been a one-on-one client. She and I started talking. We hadn't talked for a while. And she said, well, what are you doing now? And I said, I'm focused on speaking. And do you know what she said? She goes, oh my gosh, we have a retreat coming up. You would be my number one choice. Let's talk about that. That's what I'm talking about, folks. that when you start focusing on things and you tell everyone you know, that will make all the difference. So for those of you that are working on whatever dream it is, maybe you're in your corporate world, your corporate job, and you're just not sure what to do next, or maybe you're a business owner and you're thinking, gosh, I want more clients here versus there. Start making the focus of what you're going to start declaring to people. And then the other thing I would do is make a list of 50 people that you know that you could start calling and telling them, this is what I'm doing now. Hey, do you know anybody? And in almost any interaction you have with somebody, this is a great time to say, do you know anyone? It doesn't mean that they do, but is there someone you could connect me with that is looking for speakers, that is looking for an online copywriter, that is looking for a director of compliance, whatever it is that you're trying to shift to, whether it's a job or whether it's more business or whether it's simply another dream that you have. So that's decide, declare, and then the third one is deliver. This one is simply deliver the work, deliver the thing that you say that you're doing. And you can think about this from an action perspective. One of my first coaches gave me the greatest exercise that was quite overwhelming and yet really doable. And so that might sound like, wait, that's I'm speaking out of two sides of my mouth. He gave me something called 100 actions. And his whole theory, which is a very proven theory, is if you commit to doing 100 actions in a month, not necessarily big things, but like call Sue at so-and-so, email Sally here. If you commit to doing 100 actions focused on your dream or your goal, most likely something is going to happen in that month. And his challenge was you do 100 actions in a month. Admittedly, I only got to 60. I think it was 63, if I'm to be honest. This was probably 20 years ago. And it was true. Things started happening. When you take action, things start happening. And guess what? You actually feel more confident. So it's such a win-win. It's a great, great thing to do because you're going to also feel more motivated. You're going to feel more fulfilled. You're actually going to start talking to people and feel like, wow, I'm actually doing this. Because for me too, at first, we can all deal with self-doubt and think, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming and I have to call all these people, and just start with one action that you could take this week to help you get closer to your dream. Let's recap. Number 1, decide whatever your dream or your goal is. Number 2, declare it to everyone. Tell them what you're doing or what you want. You never know what could happen. Number 3, deliver, take action. I want to share a story from a client of mine who really wanted to write for National Geographic. And you know what she said to me? She says, I don't know anybody that works there. I don't know how I could find a connection there. And I said, well, have you asked anybody recently? And she hadn't. Now, here's the funny part. I know somebody that writes for National Geographic. And of course, I was going to volunteer that. But if she didn't know me, she could have made that assumption. We might be making assumptions. You might be making assumptions about people, and maybe you don't think that they know somebody. You don't think that they have this connection, but have you asked? And I have a whole other section or a whole other talk on how to make a powerful ask, which you can watch later or watch another time. And yet that is something that we do. We make assumptions. So remember to take action, decide, declare, deliver to reach your vision. And you too can stand out with unshakable confidence. And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.